Hello, my name's Rebecca Richardson, but most people call me Becky, and welcome to my summer wrap-up. This is actually the first wrap-up I've ever filmed, just because, I don't really read that much. At the moment, I'm getting better at increasing what I'm reading, which I think this video kind of proves, actually. But I thought I've read enough over the summer that we can actually do a video about what it is that I have read. So this summer, I read 9 books so far, summer being kind of July through to what has happened so far in September. That's kind of what I'm classing as summer, because I've already talked about the books in June. Yeah, 9 books from July through to now, September, which doesn't sound like a lot for some people. I know people who read 20 plus books in a month, but bearing in mind I only read 8 books in the entirety of 2018, I think 9 books in the last 2.5 months is pretty good. It is, however, probably a one-off, because obviously it's been the summer, I've been on holiday, and I read a lot more when I'm off and I'm abroad and I just have time to sit and read 24/7. So this is probably the most books you'll see on one of these videos. There probably won't be another wrap up till the very end of the year. Out of these 9 books, they're pretty much all old books now. I am kind of going back over and catching up on all of the books that I missed out on over the last 6 years. So you've probably heard of every book on this list. You've probably read every book on this list when you were 12 or something. But I'm catching up slowly. So the majority of these books are like that. There is 1 graphic novel, and 2 of these are also rereads, and there is also a surprising DNF that I wasn't expecting, but I suppose I expected it more as the book went on, but we'll get to it. So yeah, I think we'll start. We're just going to go through these in order, starting from July through to now. So the first book I read this summer is Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. This was a reread. I first read the Infernal Devices series 3 years ago, and I don't usually reread books, but this was for my coursework. There is a whole vlog about it. I wouldn't recommend watching it because it's an hour long, because it took me a month to read this. The reason it took me a month to read it is really because it's a reread, and the reason I don't reread books is because I know what happens, and so I get easily bored, because I'm not oh, what's gonna happen next? I'm I've read this before, I know how this ends, so it's not as exciting, I find. Also, because an issue I often find when I do reread things is that it ruins it for me if it was something that I originally enjoyed, which is something you'll see talked about later in this video, and it is something that kind of applies to this. I've always kind of hailed this as probably my favourite Cassandra Clare book. Rereading it, I don't think that's true anymore. I definitely enjoyed it, and between this and the other one I reread, definitely still my favourite was this one. But I wouldn't say maybe it's that overall it's my favourite. I did definitely learn some things rereading it though. If you haven't read this book, since I always forget to do this bit, Clockwork Angel is a book by Cassandra Clare. It is the first in the Infernal Devices trilogy, and it follows Tessa Gray as she moved to London in the hopes of finding her brother, who has been sending her letters from his work, and instead ends up being kidnapped by these warlocks who teach her through some interesting methods that she can shapeshift. The Shadowhunters obviously then get involved, since it's the Shadowhunter Chronicles, and this story revolves mainly around her trying to find out what actually happened to her brother and who she actually is. Rereading it, there were some things I remembered, the main scenes I remembered, and I'd say that my favourite scenes in it are still my favourite scenes, but it definitely wasn't as great as I remember it being, kind of thing. I was reading it and I was a bit yeah, alright, it's kind of boring. It did make me like some characters more though. There were some characters that I never disliked, but some side characters that I just didn't really care too much about, that reading this I'm now you are the best people here. You're the ones who we care about the most. Specifically Henry and Sophie, I think, were 2 characters that I didn't give enough attention the first time I read this, and rereading it I'm why didn't I don't really get why I didn't pay attention to more of the side characters, but I definitely am now. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't reread this again, the same as I probably wouldn't reread many books again. A few opinions changed, but not enough for me to class it as something that I now don't like. It definitely proved to me that maybe it's not my favourite, but I would say that I do definitely still actually enjoy the book. The next book I read this summer is actually a series, because I thought we might as well talk about the series all in one go, and that is The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stavata. If you've seen my Thailand vlogs, you'll have seen me reading these books. I read them in the 3 weeks I was on holiday, and I thoroughly enjoyed them, actually. These weren't a reread. This was my first time reading this series. My friend told me to read them, and I was yeah, alright, and I read them, and they are just the kind of thing that when I was 14, I would absolutely adored, and so it was almost quite nostalgic. We will, I think, so I don't have to keep holding them like this, briefly talk about them each separately, but just slightly. So, the first book, The Raven Boys, I would say that this is not my favourite, but probably my second favourite. out of them. It definitely gave me like almost like Twilight vibes, but in the sense of like small American town kind of thing. When you're from outside of America, you kind of only have stereotypical views of small American towns. So the only thing I really had to go off was like what you kind of hear about and the stereotypes you see, and like Twilight. That was all I had to go off. But I did definitely like the kind of cozy feel that I think the whole series really has, but specifically in this book as well. Kind of meeting the characters and seeing the relationships between them all, and just kind of being within Henrietta. Like, it's all quite cozy and quite cute. I just like that kind of easy vibe. Something I mentioned a lot in the vlogs is that what I like about these is that there's no like greater good, there's no like big serious plot line. It's not like we must save the world and people are like dying and being tortured and things. Like, it's just a couple of kids trying to find a Welsh king. That is the plot line. Like, it's more character based than it is plot based, and so you don't have all of this like dramatic stuff going on that's going to make me cry my eyes out. And as someone who this year has read a lot of high fantasy, it was quite a nice break. Again, since I always forget to do this, if you haven't read this series, specifically The Raven Boys, The Raven Boys follows a girl called Blue who lives with her family of psychics, and one day she meets these private school boys who are trying to find a Welsh king, and through some supernatural circumstances to do with a lot of ghosts and a possible psychic reading about her killing her true love, she decides like just to tag along and see where their fates go and if they're actually supposed to all be together in the way that they all believe they are. There is a lot in this book to do with time and fate and this idea that, oh, we must all be here for a reason, like, you know, we were obviously supposed to cross paths kind of thing, and that does fuel a lot of the plot line. I find the one thing I would say about this book is that they all felt quite passive at times, when it sort of felt that things were happening around the characters and they were just going along with it rather than actually doing things themselves. But that is just like a slight niggle I had with it, and it was something that kind of got better as the plot went on. The second book in the series is The Dream Thieves. This was my favourite, literally just because of the imagery. I think that the imagery is something that Maggie Stiefvater does really well, and I just thought it was so good in this book, especially all of like the street racing that goes on and the parties and the bit at the end with like the dream creatures fighting. It was just a book that I could really immerse myself in and I could see all happening, and I just really appreciated that the colours that you could see from like the descriptions that Maggie was creating. It was just so good. Obviously I'm not going to talk about each of them too much like individually, also because I don't want to spoil the plot lines, but just yeah, that was mainly why this was my favourite book, because for a start I think the plot is the better out of the 4 books, but also just the description and the scenes that were created were just so good. The third book is Blue Lily Lily Blue, and I don't know if this is like my 3rd or 4th favourite. Like, it was okay. I went into it kind of expecting it to be my least favourite, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't really remember the plot of this book. I think that's something you can say about the whole series. I couldn't sit here and be like, this is exactly what happened in this book and that's where it ended and these are all the things that happened in between. Because, like I said, it is more character focused than plot focused, and the plot kind of goes all over the place. This I found after I finished reading it, I look back and I was like, what actually happened in that book? There's caves. That's all I can really say for definite. There's caves in this book, and yeah, it definitely kind of went in some odd angles. However, I will say that the villains in this book are great. We meet Green Mantle and his wife more in this book. They're kind of Green Mantle sort of mentioned in the second one, I believe, but he's sort of like a character in this one. And him and his wife Piper are like my favourite villains, possibly. They're just so fun. Like, they're not in depth. They're not like morally grey. They're not the kind of villains that I find super duper interesting. They're just like fun and like your kind of stereotypical villains. Like, I kind of imagine them being in like a kid's cartoon villains. They kind of have that kind of vibe, and it's really funny to watch. So I would say they are definitely kind of the highlight of this book. There was a lot in this one that I found a bit odd, but I think that's kind of the vibe of the books. Again, something that I did like in this book is a lot of scenes that like seem strange when they're being described to you, and you're just like, what is happening? What's happening right now? But that's kind of the entire series, so it's fine. I will also say that it got creepy. Like, even in the second one, I am like a massive wimp when it comes to like literally anything, and I class these books as having horror imagery. That's how big of like a wimp I am, and they definitely did start to get scary because I personally think Noah is incredibly freaky. So yeah, those are definitely the highlights of this book, the kind of weird vibe, some of the freakiness that goes on, and the Green Mantle villains. The last book is The Raven King. Not gonna lie, don't really remember anything that happened in it. I could not tell you the first like half of this book and like what actually went down in it. All I really remember is from the scene where Gansey starts following the birds. That's like it. Anything that happened before that, I don't really remember. I vaguely remember, like, the Robo Bee and Henry. Henry's a fun guy. I'm glad we saw more of him. Other than that, I don't really know what happened in this book. I will say that I thought the ending was not a letdown, but a bit anticlimactic, which is actually something I felt the whole series kind of dealt with. There were scenes that I thought would kind of make me cry more than they did. Specifically, I'm trying not to be spoilery, a specific death scene that I thought would be like a bigger thing. I thought I was gonna cry. I thought they were gonna really go in. I thought you'd see the other characters being like really like sad. Obviously, you know, when somebody dies you tend to be sad, but instead we kind of got this odd vibe when they were all just like looking at the dead person, just like, huh, that's a thing, that they're dead now, I guess. And then it was all resolved within like a page, and I was kind of like, oh, like I thought I was gonna feel sad about it, and I did, but like nowhere near what I thought I did, because the kind of odd vibe that all of the characters had towards it kind of ruined it, I felt, and so that was a bit disappointing. And I thought the villain in this was a bit odd and a bit random, and yeah, it kind of came to a conclusion that I was like, yeah, okay, I enjoyed these books, but I didn't like cry my eyes out or anything. That being said, however, I do definitely like the entire series. I would say that I really enjoyed all of them overall, just for that kind of cozy feeling. I would say that these aren't something I'd read if I wanted to, like, cry. You know, I'd say the writing is good in terms of the descriptions you get and the imagery that's built. However, in terms of the actual plot, if you're looking for a really heavy plot-driven book, maybe it's not the series for you. However, I love all of the characters dearly, and I really cannot wait for the Dreamer trilogy called On the Hawk starting soon. The next book I read this summer is City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. This was the other reread for my coursework that I actually ended up not using in my coursework, partly down to the fact that I didn't really need it. There wasn't much in it that I could get out of it for my coursework, and also because this is the book I DNF'd, which was really surprising for me because City of Bones was the book that kind of got me back into reading. The Shadowhunter Chronicles were all I read basically from the age of like 14 through to the age of like 16. Like, that was all I touched because I just love them so much. I was obsessed with them. I still do read every Shadowhunter Chronicles book that comes out, and I still am obsessed with them. But rereading this for the first time since I was 14, it's not that good. I don't know what else to say. It's not that good. I am going to do a review of this just because I kind of feel I have to. It kind of gave me so many thoughts. I don't like to make negative videos. I don't like to speak negatively about books. So it'll kind of end up being half a rant review still, because I have so many things I need to say about this that it took me over a month to get as far as I did into this. I didn't read the last 100 pages, and it took me, what page did I get up to, actually? I got up to page 400, and it took me over a month to get there, because, like, I was actually physically getting a headache trying to read this, because there is just, like, so much going on in this that I didn't agree with, and things that just, like, really struck me. And yeah, it got to the point I would read 20 pages in 2 hours and, like, actually need, like, medicine afterwards because my head just hurt from whatever it was that I just read. And in the end, I gave up and decided it wasn't worth finishing. It is, of course, a reread, though, so, like, I do know the plot. I do know the plot of the whole Mortal Instruments. And that's why it was a surprise, because I did love these books so much. I knew that the Mortal Instruments was my least favourite series out of, like, the three main Shadowhunter Chronicles series, because for a start, the writing, it's, you know, this was like 2007, I believe, when this came out, so it's kind of like dated, I suppose, a bit now, which is something that you kind of see throughout it. But also just because I remember the plotline being, like, a bit cheesy, and I didn't like as many of the characters as I did in some of the other series. So I went into it not expecting it to be my favourite, but bearing in mind I was obsessed with these back in the day. Like, the Mortal Instruments was my life for like a year. I kind of expected to like more of it than I did. I'm not saying you shouldn't read it. I still recommend these books to people who are young. Like, if anybody's, like, between the ages of like 11 and 14, I tend to be like, hey, you should read the Mortal Instruments. But if you're, like, older now, if you're, like, kind of my age onwards and you're considering getting into the Shadowhunter Chronicles now, I maybe wouldn't rush out and buy the entire series, and maybe just try one book and see how you get on with it, because it's not great. It's just, yeah, I don't really know what to say, because I don't want to be mean about this book, which is something that's going to happen. Please, like, that review will be coming, and I will talk about this more in depth and actually go through, like, quotes and things about the stuff that bothered me, which is why I'm not kind of going into too much detail now, so look out for that if you'd be interested in seeing that. But kind of in summary, it was a frustrating read. There was a lot of things that I just didn't agree with, and a lot of kind of things that, rereading it now as someone who writes myself and kind of knows where the plotline goes and things, I was like, with it. So yeah, we're just gonna say that. The next book I read this summer is Heartstopper by Alice Osmond. This is the graphic novel I was saying I read, and this follows two boys called Charlie and Nick as they fall in love, basically. The entire story, this is only volume 1, and it sort of follows them getting to know each other and then learning that they possibly have feelings for each other. And that's sort of the general plot. It's just a cute, cozy read. I do believe that this book is about characters from another book that Alice Osmond has read. However, I haven't read that other book, so I kind of just went into this knowing these as like new characters to specifically this series. And I do plan on reading volume 2 at some point when I get my hands on it. This is the quickest I've ever read anything. It is the first graphic novel I've read, and it took me like an hour and a half, 2 hours, I think, to read. I was actually midway through reading City of Bones and was like, Jesus Christ, I need to read something else. And then I just read this in a day just to get away from City of Bones. And I did just this kind of, I like for the same reason that I liked parts of the Raven Cycle, as in like completely two different books, by the way, but they both kind of have that cute, cozy vibe where I was just kind of happy meeting the characters and getting to know them, that sort of thing. I also really like the art in this. However, I'm not an artist. I don't know what's classed as good art and what isn't. It just looked cute and fun to me. So something I did really like about it though is that going into it, I didn't realise that it's like an English series and like set in England, and there was just like some words that came up that just reminded me of my own school, because obviously a lot of books I read are about like American teenagers, and so it's kind of harder to relate to. But I don't know, just things in this, just mentioning things like year 10 just felt weird instead of it being like 9th grade or something. It just like took me by surprise, and there was just very little things in like to do with the school and also in the way they spoke that just like I was having like flashbacks to my own school experience, and it was not necessarily a good thing, but it was quite nice to be able to like relate to it in that little bit way that I usually can't with a lot of YA because it's all set in America. So it wasn't something I was expecting, but it was just kind of something cute that I enjoyed. But I would say if you're looking for like a cute little easy read that's just kind of nice and cozy and just super quick as well, then definitely pick up this. I will be finding volume 2 as soon as I can. From a cozy series to a slightly more difficult one, the next 2 books that I read this summer, and the final 2 books I read this summer, are Shadow and Bone and Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. This, I felt I had to come up in this. These are the 2 books I read in September, and I thought I have to mention them in this because I made such a thing about, like, do I read Shadow and Bone? That I felt I, like, have to mention the fact that I've read Shadow and Bone now and book 2. The reason that book 3 isn't here, by the way, this isn't like a case of I read the second one and was like, no. It's just a case of I haven't started it yet. I finished this Saturday. It's now Thursday. I might start it later today. I just haven't yet. Not going to discuss the plot of this. I will discuss my thoughts on it, but obviously I don't want to get too spoilery discussing, like, second book plots. So the plot of Shadow and Bone, if you haven't read it, this is about a girl called Alina who is working for an army in this fictional country called Ravka, which I believe is supposed to be based on Russia. When she finds out, I suppose, that she has these amazing sun powers, she kind of draws the attention of the magical people of this world known as the Grisha and their leader, the Darkling, and she ends up joining their world and all of the things that it means for somebody who has sun powers in a world where literally nobody else has sun powers, and all of the things that she is expected to do with it and the things that she actually does with it. I'm trying to be incredibly vague if you can't tell. What did I think of this book is a question. So, not as bad as I was expecting, I think, is what I need to start out with. So many people were like, you'll hate it, you'll hate these characters, these people are the worst, this is a bad thing. And like, I didn't find that. There was a love triangle people were talking about that I felt wasn't really in here. Like, it kind of was to an extent, but not to an annoying extent. I think one thing that tends to annoy me in love triangles is the vibe where the middle character spends like 90% of the time like, oh, woe is me, these 2 people are in love with me, who do I choose? And that didn't happen in this because like a strong 3 chapters in, she was like, oh yeah, that guy's crap, and like just moved on. I know it's something that comes up later in the series, we do see it more, but it's not as if every time she speaks to one of them, she's also thinking, but this other man, like it wasn't like that. which is my usual issue with love triangles, so it wasn't like as big an issue as I was expecting. That could change in Ruin and Rising, especially because I feel that Nikolai is going to make this a love square, which is not something I've ever wanted in my life. But, you know, as far as the characters go, Alina definitely, like, isn't my favourite protagonist I've ever read about. However, I don't dislike her, like, she's not annoying or anything. I will say that one thing I have to say about both of these books is that they are so incredibly passive as far as some of the characters are concerned. Like, honestly, until the last 200 pages of the second one, Siege and Storm, I don't even know what Alina did, or what anyone did. And it did feel a bit like that in this one as well. Until the end, it kind of felt like she was just being passed about, and the entire book was her just being like, oh, I'm this now, and these people want me to go here, and now they want me to go there, and now they want me to do this. And I was like, are you going to do something yourself? At any point in this book, it kind of had that vibe to it. However, she wasn't, like, annoying in any way. That was just kind of something that all of the characters seemed to have in common, that they were just being passed about. I will say I'm really disappointed in a way, though, because everybody made out that the Darkling was this, like, amazing villain, and that he was, like, super morally grey, and, you know, you'd be really conflicted about him because he's evil, but he also has all of this to him. And I really love characters like that. Like, Sebastian Morgenstern is one of my favourite villains, just because, like, I cried when he died, but he was an evil man. Like, there was so much going on with him, and I thought, from what people had said, the Darkling was going to be like that. He isn't at all. He's just your average, like, wants to take over the world villain. That's all he has to him. That's all there is to him. He's very old, and all he wants to do is take over the world. Basically, he's just like every other villain I've ever read about in a book, and that was really disappointing, because I was ready to have this villain that I could, like, fall in love with, because he's so conflicting, and there's all these different things going on with him, and your opinions are just constantly changing. No, he's just evil, and he wants to take over the world. That's kind of it. Another thing I will say about this book that people kind of, like, would say I felt that I didn't, is that everybody said that I would, like, hate Mal with, like, every inch of my being. And, like, I definitely wouldn't say I like him. He's just, like, vaguely annoying, but I don't hate him. And the reason I don't hate him, really, is just because he doesn't do enough for me to hate him. He does nothing. If there's one thing I can say about Mal, it's that he does literally nothing. All he's done in these two books is, like, he helped them track down some animals. Yeah. The rest of the time, he just, like, drinks and, like, tries to get attention from Alina. That's literally all he does. And so I was a bit like, I can't hate him just because he doesn't do anything. He has the presence of a large rock. That's literally, that's Mal. He doesn't do anything. So I can't hate him. I could just kind of wish he wasn't there, or that he was there and did more. So for that purpose, I will say that it has been difficult reading both, mainly because a lot of it kind of is to do with who she's going to end up with. And I know how it ends. I know who she ends up with. And it's annoying for a start, but I kind of believe that she shouldn't have ended up with either, or even Nikolai. I don't think she should have ended up with any of them. And, like, knowing how it ends, I haven't even read the third one, but I'm already frustrated about the ending, because I think they could have took it down a completely different path that would have been so cool. And I just know how, and I'm kind of preemptively disappointed. However, focusing on the second one for a moment, all the same issues I had with the first one. Nobody did anything in this book particularly. Alina just got, like, passed around for the majority, up until, like, the last few chapters where, like shit hit the fan so quick, and we will talk about that in a minute. But, like, the first, like, 300 pages, what happened, really? She just, like, wandered around a bit, and then she got, like, kidnapped, and then, oh no, you're not kidnapped now we're gonna go and do this, but we're gonna work with this person, and then this person's gonna tell me what to do. Like, that was the whole plot line. It was just Alina being told what to do, up until the very end, where suddenly she started doing things for herself. And I was like, wow, finally, finally characters are making their own decisions. Yeah, I don't enjoy books where the main characters don't do anything. And that's kind of what this was. The plot was carrying the characters rather than the characters carrying the plot. The end, however, oh my god, things got so intense so quick. I was like, what is going on? Suddenly, people are dying, people are having their limbs ripped off. I was like, what is going on? It got so intense. It kind of reminded me of a lot of the Throne of Glass books, where kind of boring for the majority of it, but the last 30 pages, oh my god, that was kind of the vibe of this book. I will say the one thing that saved this for me, however, was Nikolai. Just because he's a cool character, I think. I read Crooked Kingdom and he was in that, and I was straight away like, I'm gonna like you, you're gonna be my favourite of the other series. And I was right, he is. I still don't think him and Alina were ever, like, a good ship, but he's definitely my favourite out of them, and he definitely kind of carried this book for me. I don't know if I would have, like, got through it as quick as I did if it wasn't for Nikolai. I do still have Ruin and Rising to read, as I said, and I am going to be starting it soon. I'm just kind of apprehensive because, like I said, I know how it ends. And, like, I know I'm not going to be happy with the ending. I know how it ends, and I'm already frustrated about it in advance. My perfect ending, gonna be completely honest, I think Alina should have been evil. I think in this book, once she got the second, like, amplifier thing, and she started talking about this sudden, like, urge for power, she had a very Macbeth feel suddenly from that point on, and this, like, hunger for power that she took on, and this darkness she was talking about inside her. It was frustrating because I was reading it thinking this would have been the perfect beginning to have her descend into villainhood, to make her, like, the big villain and working with the Darkling, and then the two of them having this massive big death scene and making the reader and the characters kind of mourn the Alina at the beginning, kind of like Death Note, where you kind of see Light's slow descent into insanity. That would have been so great, and I think there was so much set up that they could have taken it in that direction from the things you see her think about and the things that she does. And just the fact that that wasn't used, and the fact that instead we get some weird martyrdom, I was, it frustrates me so much because it would have been brilliant, which is why it's taking me so long to get around to reading Ruin and Rising, because even reading this, I was like, there's so much we could have done and you haven't done it. And I know I'm going to finish it and just be like, what was the point? I know that's where we're going with this. But I will get around to it because overall, I will say that I have enjoyed the plot of these. They're definitely not great. I think I gave both of these 3 stars on Goodreads, but I read them fairly quickly. I read them both in a week, and it was because I wanted to read them. I was actually looking forward to reading them, so it's not as if I've been, like, dragging myself through them. I just think that there's things about them that could have been better, and that frustrates me, basically. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't say, like, don't read these. I would still say read them, especially if you've read Six of Crows. However, they're not anything on the level that Six of Crows is on, but, like, you know, if you like Leigh Bardugo's writing and you're interested in watching the show when it comes out, that's why I'm reading these, because of the show coming out. So yeah, they're definitely not as good as everybody said, but I definitely would say that they're not worth, like, completely crossing out. Like, they're okay. And the end of this one, Siege of Storm, definitely kind of saved it for me, and is kind of making me look forward to seeing what happens in the next book. However, that is it. That is all of the books I have read this summer. I'm sorry this is such a long video. I didn't mean it to be as long. I find my wrap-ups are always long because I don't know how to summarise. I just kind of give you a very long-winded version of my thoughts when I could have just covered it in, like, 30 seconds or something. So sorry about that. That is it, though. Finally, we are at the end of my summer wrap-up. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. Please do comment your thoughts on any of these books if you've read them below. I would quite like to see if people in any way agree with me on my thoughts on any of them, or if anybody else has reread any of their, like, childhood favourites and realised that actually they're not that great, kind of thing. There will be a review of City of Bones coming out, like I said, you know, look out for that if you're interested. But that is everything, so I will see you very soon. Bye!